December 19, 1944, Verdun, France. The room smells of burnt coffee and desperation. General Dwight D. Eisenhower stands at the head of a long wooden table, his hands flat against its surface, his knuckles white. Before him lies a map of Western Europe, a map that, 48 hours ago, showed the Allied forces advancing toward Germany in orderly fashion. Now that map tells a different story. Red arrows pierce through the Ardennes forest like daggers, slashing through positions that military planners had sworn were impenetrable. Outside the windows of the old French barracks, snow falls in sheets. The temperature hovers near zero, and somewhere in that frozen darkness, 100,000 German soldiers are pouring through a gap in the Allied line that nobody believed could exist. The officers around the table shuffle nervously. General Omar Bradley stares at the map with the expression of a man watching his house burn down. General Courtney Hodges, whose First Army is bearing the brunt of the assault, hasn't slept in 2 days. His hands tremble as he lights another cigarette. "Gentlemen," Eisenhower begins, his voice measured but tight, "I want only one thing from this meeting. I want solutions. I want someone to tell me how we stop this." Silence. Red arrows on the map seem to pulse with malevolent intent. The German offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, has caught the Allies completely off guard. An entire American division has been annihilated in the first 24 hours. Thousands of soldiers are dead, captured, or fleeing through forests they cannot navigate. And at the center of the German advance sits a small Belgian town that none of them had thought about until this morning. Bastogne. Eisenhower taps the map where the town sits at a crossroads of 7 major roads. If the Germans take Bastogne, they control the road network. If they control the road network, they split our forces in half. If they split our forces in half. He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. The door opens. A gust of frozen air sweeps into the room, and with it comes a man who seems to exist in a perpetual state of controlled fury. He wears a helmet with 3 stars, polished cavalry boots, and a pair of ivory-handled pistols on his hips. His jaw is set. His eyes are already on the map. General George S. Patton walks to the table, glances at the red arrows, and does something that nobody in the room expects. He smiles. "I've been waiting for this," Patton says, his voice carrying a strange note of satisfaction. "The German has put his head in the meat grinder, and I intend to turn the handle." Eisenhower's eyes narrow. "George, the situation is critical. We need realistic. I can attack in 48 hours. The room goes silent again, but this time, it's a different kind of silence. It's the silence of men who have just heard something that violates the laws of physics. Bradley shakes his head slowly. "George, your army is 100 miles to the south, facing east. You'd have to disengage from active combat, turn your entire force 90 degrees, and move through some of the worst winter conditions in European history. In 48 hours, that's not realistic. That's not even possible." Patton doesn't blink. "I didn't say it would be comfortable. I said it would be done." And in that moment, in that frozen room in Verdun, a decision is made that will save 10,000 American lives, shatter Hitler's last offensive, and redefine what military commanders believe is achievable in winter warfare. But first, they have to believe it can happen at all. Section 2, the German Gamble. To understand what Patton is about to attempt, you must first understand what he is facing. 3 days earlier, on December 16, 1944, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, the largest German offensive on the Western Front since the invasion of France in 1940. The plan is audacious, desperate, and driven by a dictator who refuses to accept that his empire is collapsing. Hitler's generals have told him the offensive is impossible. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the nominal commander, privately calls it madness. The German army is exhausted, undersupplied, and fighting on 2 fronts against enemies with overwhelming material superiority. But Hitler doesn't listen. He has assembled 25 divisions, nearly 500,000 men, and pointed them at the weakest section of the Allied line, the Ardennes forest. American intelligence has dismissed the Ardennes as an unlikely attack route. The terrain is too rugged, the roads too narrow, the forests too dense for armored warfare. Allied planners have placed only 4 American divisions along an 80-mile front, a skeleton crew guarding what everyone assumes is a quiet sector. They are catastrophically wrong. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16, German artillery opens fire along the entire front. The barrage lasts 90 minutes. When it lifts, German infantry and armor surge forward through the fog. The American defenders are overwhelmed within hours. Entire regiments are encircled. Communication lines are cut. Soldiers who have never seen combat find themselves facing elite SS Panzer divisions in waist-deep snow. And at the center of Hitler's plan sits one critical objective: Antwerp. If the Germans can punch through the Ardennes, wheel north, and capture the Belgian port of Antwerp, they will sever the Allied supply lines and trap 4 Allied armies against the English Channel. It is 1940 all over again, Dunkirk in reverse. Hitler truly believes, that if he can force the Western Allies into a catastrophic defeat, they will sue for a negotiated peace. Then Germany can turn its full might against the Soviet Union and salvage something from the wreckage of the Third Reich. It is a fantasy, but for 72 hours it almost works. Section 3. The Encirclement. December 20, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium. The snow is falling so heavily that visibility drops to 20 yards. In the small Belgian town of Bastogne, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe peers through a frost-covered window at the white curtain descending from the sky. He is not supposed to be here. McAuliffe commands the 101st Airborne Division, elite paratroopers trained for lightning assaults, not static defense. His men were pulled from rest camps in France and rushed to Bastogne in open trucks, many without proper winter gear. They arrived just ahead of the German spearheads. Now they are surrounded. General, his aide hands him a field report. The Germans have cut the Arlon Road. That was our last supply route. McAuliffe nods slowly. The trap has closed. Inside Bastogne, there are approximately 18,000 American soldiers, not just paratroopers, but tank crews, artillerymen, headquarters staff, anyone who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. They have limited ammunition, limited food, and almost no medical supplies. The wounded are dying in makeshift aid stations because doctors lack plasma and morphine. Outside the perimeter, 5 German divisions are tightening the noose. McAuliffe walks to his command post, where a group of officers huddle around a radio that crackles with static. He can feel their eyes on him, waiting for direction. "We're going to hold this town," he says simply. "The relief column is coming." A young major clears his throat. "Sir, with respect, who exactly is coming? First Army is retreating. The roads are cut. The weather has grounded our aircraft. Who is supposed to relieve us?" McAuliffe glances at the map on the wall, at the tiny blue arrow that represents Patton's Third Army, 100 miles to the south. "Patton," he says, "Patton is coming." The major blinks. "General, that's impossible. He can't move an entire army through this weather in time, not through these roads, not in winter." McAuliffe turns back to the window. Outside, German shells begin to fall, throwing up geysers of snow and frozen earth. "Then we'd better hope," he says quietly, "that General Patton doesn't know what's impossible." Section 4. The Verdun Conference. Back in Verdun, the argument continues. Eisenhower has listened to Patton's impossible promise. He has seen the map, he understands the mathematics, and yet. George, Eisenhower says, "Walk me through this, exactly." Patton moves to the map with the energy of a man who has rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times. The Germans expect us to be slow. They expect us to be cautious. They expect us to hold our positions and wait for reinforcements. That's what every German planner has assumed since the beginning of this war. He traces his finger along the map. "Right now, my Third Army is facing east, engaging German forces along the Saar. I have 3 corps, nearly 250,000 men, with armor, artillery, and full logistical support." "And you're going to turn them north," Bradley says flatly, "in the middle of winter." "I'm going to turn them north in the middle of winter," Patton confirms, "and I'm going to do it faster than the Germans believe is humanly possible." Eisenhower folds his arms. How fast exactly? 48 hours to have the first elements attacking toward Bastogne, 72 hours to have 3 full divisions in combat. The room erupts. Officers protest simultaneously, their voices overlapping. The roads won't support that kind of traffic. The fuel consumption alone. His men haven't slept in days. Patton raises his hand and the room falls silent. When he speaks again, his voice is quiet, almost gentle. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns. I understand the logistics. I understand that what I am proposing will push my army to the edge of physical collapse. I understand that men will die of exhaustion. Vehicles will break down. Frostbite will claim hundreds, maybe thousands." He pauses. "But I also understand what happens if Bastogne falls. I understand that the 101st Airborne, 10,000 American boys, will be annihilated or captured. I understand that the German offensive will roll through to the Meuse, and we will spend the next 3 months trying to recover ground we're about to lose in 3 days. He turns to Eisenhower. "Ike, you asked for solutions. This is my solution. It will be brutal, it will be costly, and it will work." Eisenhower holds his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nods. "Do it, relieve Bastogne." Patton is already walking toward the door. Section 5. The Impossible Promise. What Patton has just promised is, by every conventional military standard, impossible. Consider the scope of the problem. The Third Army consists of approximately 250,000 men, 130,000 vehicles, and tens of thousands of tons of equipment. They are currently engaged in active combat operations facing east. To relieve Bostonia, they must disengage from the enemy without being overwhelmed. Execute a 90-degree turn, pivoting their entire axis of advance from east to north. Move over roads that are frozen, narrow, and in many cases, still under German control. Arrive at Bostonia with enough combat power to break through entrenched German positions. Under normal circumstances, this kind of maneuver would take 2 to 3 weeks of planning. Fuel depots would need to be repositioned, supply lines would need to be rerouted, units would need to be refitted. Patton doesn't have 2 weeks, he doesn't have 1 week, he has 48 hours. What makes this possible, what makes it conceivable, is that Patton has already planned for it. In the days before the German offensive, while other Allied commanders were focused on the advance into Germany, Patton was studying his maps, he was reading intelligence reports, and he was asking a question that nobody else thought to ask: what if the Germans attack through the Ardennes? His staff thought he was being paranoid. The Ardennes was a quiet sector. There was no indication of German offensive preparations, but Patton trusted his instincts, and his instincts told him that the quiet was too quiet. So he ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans for a northern pivot. He identified 3 possible attack routes. He prepositioned supplies. He briefed his corps commanders on the possibility of a rapid reorientation. When the German offensive began, Patton was the only Allied commander who wasn't surprised. He was the only one who already had a plan. Now he picks up the phone and calls his headquarters in Nancy, France. Execute Plan 3, he says. We move tonight. Section 6. The pivot begins. December 1920, 1944, 3rd Army Sector. The orders go out at 6:00 p.m. on December 19. Within hours, the greatest logistical movement of the European war begins. Captain James Maxwell is a company commander in the 4th Armored Division. He has been asleep for exactly 45 minutes when his sergeant shakes him awake. Sir, new orders, we're moving out. Maxwell rubs his eyes. Moving where? We just got into position. North, sir, Bostonia. Maxwell stares at him. That's 100 miles from here, in the wrong direction. Yes, sir, Colonel says we're leaving in 2 hours. Maxwell swings his legs off the cot and reaches for his boots. Outside, he can hear engines starting tanks, half-tracks, trucks. The night is filled with the roar of machinery. For the next 72 hours, Captain Maxwell and 250,000 other American soldiers will participate in a forced march that defies comprehension. They will move through blizzards, over frozen roads, past abandoned vehicles and dead horses. They will sleep in 20-minute intervals, standing up, leaning against their equipment. They will eat cold rations because there is no time to stop and heat food. And they will not complain because they know what is at stake. Think about the guys in Bostonia, Maxwell tells his men as they mount up. They've got it worse than us. They're surrounded. They're running out of ammo. They're counting on us to get there, so we're going to get there. The column lurches forward into the darkness. Section 7. The Frozen March. The conditions are almost unimaginable. Temperatures drop to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind cuts through uniforms designed for autumn, not Arctic warfare. Soldiers wrap their feet in burlap sacks to prevent frostbite. It doesn't always work. Corporal Thomas Jenkins, a truck driver in the 80th Infantry Division, will later describe the march in a letter to his wife. We drove for 18 hours straight. I couldn't feel my hands on the steering wheel. When we stopped to refuel, I tried to get out of the cab and fell flat on my face. My legs had gone numb. The medic wanted to pull me off the line, but I told him no. If I stopped, the truck stopped. If the truck stopped, the column stopped. I got back behind the wheel and kept driving. The roads are a nightmare. The Ardennes region is a maze of narrow forest paths designed for horse carts, not modern armor. When one vehicle breaks down, and vehicles break down constantly, the entire column grinds to a halt. Patton's solution is brutal but effective. Push the disabled vehicles off the road. If a tank's transmission fails, shove it into a ditch and keep moving. There is no time for repairs. The human cost is severe. Hundreds of soldiers collapse from exhaustion and are left at aid stations along the route. Thousands suffer from frostbite. Some fall asleep on their feet and are run over by the vehicles behind them. But the column keeps moving, hour after hour, mile after mile. Section 8. The Fuel Crisis. December 20, 1944, 3rd Army Supply Depot. Colonel Oscar Koch, Patton's intelligence chief, bursts into the general's command post with a face the color of chalk. "General, we have a problem." Patton looks up from his map. "I don't want problems, Oscar. I want solutions." "The fuel, sir. Our consumption rate is double what we projected. The cold weather is killing mileage, and the stop-and-go traffic is burning fuel faster than we can deliver it." Patton's jaw tightens. "How bad?" "At current rates, the 4th Armored Division will run dry 12 miles from Bostonia." 12 miles? After everything, the planning, the pivot, the frozen march, to run out of gas 12 miles from the objective would be catastrophic. It would mean Bostonia falls. It would mean the entire maneuver was for nothing. Patton turns to his logistics officer. "Strip the rear echelons. Every gallon of fuel that isn't absolutely essential to survival gets diverted to the combat units." "Sir, that will leave our headquarters and support units without." "I don't care about headquarters. Headquarters can walk, tanks cannot." The fuel is diverted. Trucks that were carrying supplies for rear area units are emptied and sent forward with gasoline. Staff officers find themselves stranded at crossroads, watching their transport disappear north. One quartermaster sergeant later recalls, "We gave them everything. Our fuel, our rations, our blankets. The guys heading north needed it more than we did. Besides, Patton would have shot us if we held anything back." The fuel gets through, barely. Section 9, Nuts. December 22, 1944, Bostonia. While Patton's army claws its way north, the situation in Bostonia reaches its crisis point. German forces have completely surrounded the town. Artillery bombardment is constant. American casualties are mounting, and medical supplies are virtually exhausted. Surgeons operate without anesthesia. The dead are stacked in frozen rows behind the aid stations because there is no time to bury them. At 11:30 a.m., a German delegation approaches the American lines under a flag of truce. They carry a message from the German commander demanding the surrender of the garrison. To the USA commander of the encircled town of Bostonia, there is only one possibility to save the encircled USA troops from total annihilation: the honorable surrender of the encircled town. The message is brought to General McAuliffe, who has been asleep on a cot for exactly 2 hours. He reads it, blinks, and crumples the paper in his fist. "Nuts," he mutters. His aide looks confused. "Sir." "That's my answer, nuts." "General, what should I write?" McAuliffe straightens his helmet. "Just write nuts, they'll understand." The typed reply, the single word, nuts, becomes one of the most famous military responses in history. When the German officers ask for clarification, they are told, "It means go to hell." The battle continues. McAuliffe knows that his bluster is covering a desperate situation. His men are at the breaking point. If relief doesn't arrive within 48 hours, his defiance will mean nothing. He walks to the window and looks south, toward the distant hills where, somewhere in that frozen wilderness, George Patton's army is fighting its way toward him. "Come on, George," he whispers. "Don't let us down." Section 10, Breaking Through. December 26, 1944, 4:45 p.m. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams is a tank commander in the 4th Armored Division. He has been awake for 60 hours. His M4 Sherman tank, nicknamed Thunderbolt, has been driving through snow and enemy fire for 3 days straight. Now, in the fatting light of a December afternoon, he sees something that makes his heart race. Ahead, through the trees, he can see the spires of Bostonia. "That's it," his gunner shouts. "That's the town." Abrams grabs his radio. "All units, this is Thunderbolt 6. The objective is in sight. Push forward. Repeat, push forward." Between Abrams and Bostonia lies one final obstacle, a German defensive line anchored on the village of Assenois. The Germans have dug in with anti-tank guns and infantry. Under normal circumstances, breaking through would require careful reconnaissance, artillery preparation, and coordinated assault. Abrams doesn't have time for normal circumstances. "We're going straight through," he announces. "Maximum speed, don't stop for anything." The tanks surge forward. German shells bracket the column, destroying 2 Shermans. Abrams doesn't slow down. His tank smashes through a stone wall, scattering German infantry. Machine guns chatter. Men scream. The world dissolves into fire and chaos. And then, suddenly, they are through. At 4:50 p.m. on December 26, 1944, the first tanks of the 4th Armored Division roll into Bostonia. The siege is broken. Captain William Dwight, leading a company of Shermans, spots an American soldier standing by the roadside. The man is gaunt, unshaven, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. but he is smiling. "Welcome to Bostonia," the soldier calls out. "Glad you could make it." Dwight salutes. "Sorry we're late." "You're right on time, Captain, right on time." Behind the tanks comes the supply column: fuel, ammunition, food, and most precious of all, medical supplies. Within hours, the wounded are being evacuated. The defenders are being reinforced. The situation that seemed hopeless just days ago has been transformed. Patton's impossible pivot has worked. Section 11. German disbelief. In the German High Command, the news is received with stunned disbelief. Field Marshal Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, stares at the reports from the Bostonia sector. He has been told that a major American armored force has broken through from the south. He does not believe it. "That's impossible," he snaps at his aide. "Patton's army was facing the Saar 3 days ago. He cannot have moved that fast. The roads won't allow it. The weather won't allow it. It's physically impossible." "Respectfully, Herr Feldmarschall, the reports are confirmed. American tanks are inside Bostonia." Von Manteuffel sits heavily in his chair. He is a professional soldier, a veteran of dozens of campaigns. He has studied American tactics, analyzed American commanders. He believed he understood what the Americans were capable of. He was wrong. "We miscalculated," he says slowly. "We assumed the Americans would respond like any rational army, consolidate, regroup, wait for optimal conditions. We assumed Patton would be constrained by the same limitations that constrain us." He shakes his head. "We did not account for a commander who simply refuses to accept limitations." The German offensive continues for several more weeks, but its momentum is broken. Without Bostonia, the road network cannot support a sustained advance. Without a sustained advance, there will be no breakthrough to the Meuse, no capture of Antwerp, no negotiated peace. Hitler's last gamble has failed. Section 12. The historical verdict. The numbers tell a story of staggering achievement. In 72 hours, George Patton moved 133,178 vehicles over roads that were never designed for such traffic. His army traveled an average of 100 miles in conditions that should have made movement impossible. 6 divisions executed a 90-degree pivot and entered combat at the end of their march, not the beginning. The cost was severe. Over 500 American soldiers died during the relief operation. Thousands more suffered from frostbite and exhaustion. Hundreds of vehicles were abandoned along the route. The 4th Armored Division, which spearheaded the final breakthrough, lost a third of its tanks. But the alternative was far worse. Military historians have calculated that if Bostonia had fallen, the German offensive would have threatened the entire Allied position in Western Europe. The loss of the 101st Airborne alone would have been a psychological blow from which American morale might never have recovered. German General Gunther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff of the Western Front, later offered a professional assessment. The speed of Patton's relief of Bostonia came as a complete surprise. "We had made meticulous calculations about Allied response times. We assumed they would need at least 7 to 10 days to mount a serious counterattack. Patton did it in 3. It was the single most impressive tactical movement of the war." Even Patton's critics acknowledged the magnitude of the achievement. Bradley, who had initially dismissed the plan as impossible, later wrote, "I doubted George could do it. I was wrong. What he accomplished at Bostonia was not just a victory. It was a demonstration that the limits of military possibility are determined by the will of the commander, not the circumstances of the battlefield." Section 13. The legacy. What made Patton's decision so difficult was not the risk to himself. Generals are not usually the ones who die in winter marches. What made it difficult was the knowledge of what he was asking from his men. Patton understood that the forced march would break bodies. He understood that soldiers would collapse in the snow. He understood that the speed he demanded would leave no margin for human weakness. And he demanded it anyway. This is what his critics mean when they call him brutal, not that he enjoyed suffering, but that he was willing to impose suffering in pursuit of objectives he believed essential. He did not pretend that war could be fought without cost. He simply insisted that the cost be paid. His defenders argue that this apparent cruelty was, paradoxically, the most humane choice available. Hesitation would have meant Bostonia's fall. Bostonia's fall would have meant a prolonged German offensive. A prolonged German offensive would have killed far more soldiers than died in the relief march. The math of mercy, they argue, sometimes looks like ruthlessness. Patton himself never apologized for his methods. In a letter written shortly after the relief of Bostonia, he offered this assessment. "I demanded more from my men than any commander has a right to ask. They gave it without complaint. They marched through hell because they understood that their brothers in arms were counting on them. The Third Army did not relieve Bostonia because I ordered it. They relieved Bastogne because they refused to let their fellow soldiers die alone. Section 14, the defining moment. Return now to Verdun. The snow is still falling. The map still shows those red arrows pushing through the Ardennes. General Eisenhower still stands at the head of the table, surrounded by anxious officers who have just been told that the impossible is about to be attempted. And there is George Patton walking toward the door, his mind already racing ahead to the challenges that await: the fuel crisis, the frozen roads, the exhausted soldiers, the German guns defending Bastogne. He knows it will be brutal. He knows men will die. He knows that history will judge him for the suffering he is about to impose. But he also knows something else, something that his cautious colleagues cannot quite grasp. Sometimes the most merciless decision is the most humane. Sometimes speed is not just a tactical advantage, but a moral imperative. Sometimes the willingness to demand everything, to push past every conventional limit, is what separates victory from catastrophe. Patton pauses at the door and turns back to the assembled generals. "Gentlemen," he says, "in 48 hours I will be in Bastogne, and when I get there, I intend to kick the Germans so hard they'll think the gates of hell have opened beneath them." Then he walks out into the snow. Closing. In the winter of 1944, in one of the harshest seasons in European memory, George S. Patton accomplished something that his own colleagues believed impossible. He turned an entire army on its axis, marched it through conditions that should have stopped any force, and arrived at the decisive moment with enough strength to shatter the enemy's plans. He did not just win a battle, he redefined what military commanders believed was possible. The relief of Bastogne became a textbook example of the aggressive mobile warfare that Patton had championed throughout his career. It proved that speed, properly applied, could overcome numerical disadvantages, logistical challenges, and even the brutal indifference of winter itself. Hitler's last offensive, his desperate gamble to split the Allied forces and force a negotiated peace, died in the snow outside Bastogne. The Third Reich would survive another 5 months, but it would never again mount a major offensive in the West. And in the quiet aftermath, as the guns fell silent and the wounded were evacuated and the dead were counted, the men who had made the march would remember what it had cost them and what it had saved. They had marched through hell, they had arrived in time, and they had proven that in war, the line between brutality and mercy is often drawn by a single commander's willingness to demand the impossible. Patton's final verdict on the operation was characteristically blunt. "We moved faster than any army in history, we suffered more than I had any right to ask, and we saved Bastogne because failure was simply not an option." The most merciless decision can sometimes be the most humane. That is the lesson of Patton's pivot. That is the legacy of Bastogne.